Hi folks, Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the issue that's constantly referred to as an apocalyptic possibility, and that's called depopulation. Now, the alarmists sort of seem to go from one extreme to the other. Depopulation means that there's nobody left on the planet, not a single person. They tend to sort of avoid or deliberately overlook this idea of reducing the population, having a smaller population. And I just want to have a look at that and talk about it as an issue, because I don't see it as a problem. I see a declining population as a good thing. If you look at the amount of, in the West today, Australia included, you look at the amount of parasites and freeloaders and people who contribute no value. In fact, they create a negative value for the economy. Then if there were fewer of those people, then the economy would be more efficient. We would all have a higher standard of living. And that's, I think, an issue that's very important to consider. But I want to talk sort of more widely about why is more people better, and in situations where fewer people are better, as in creating better outcomes, that is a wealthier, higher standard of living for those that are fewer in number, but they're higher skilled, better educated, more motivated, have a better investment in the society, have more skin in the game, and so on. So let's have a look at that. Now, one of the first jobs I ever had as a kid in high school, I think I was 14, and I got a job unloading trucks at this, it was a sort of a cordial depot, and I've mentioned this in other videos. Depot, an American depot in that was, I don't know, about half an hour's bus ride from where I lived, and they used to hire over the summer season when the cordials were selling, and they distributed around to the local stores and grocery stores and supermarkets and so on. And when I think back, the warehouse where all the stuff is, so big trucks would come in, deliver it into the warehouse, then it would be sub-distributed in smaller trucks into the local area. That was kind of how things were done back then. So the guy in charge was was a fucking moron, and he he's a low-skilled guy. I doubt his IQ was much above 90, but he was in charge there, and he used to come out with all sorts of, I want to see that sweat roll, and he had these little sayings he'd come out with. But the place was beyond inefficient. Even as a high school kid, I was looking at it going, fuck, this is like really inefficient. There was all sorts of double handling, and the guy had this. It was like a make work where he'd create work just for his own aggrandizement, I think, more than anything. But the best selling cordials he would put at the back of the warehouse. And bear in mind, the warehouse in summer was almost finger tight. There wasn't, you had to sort of walk sideways down the edges around the edge of the warehouse. It was packed so tight with stuff. But so he put the best selling cordials at the back. And those were the ones that had to be, moved out the most often, of course, orange flavored cordial, that type of thing. And the worst selling ones that were sold very, very slowly, or by comparison very slowly, he would put at the front. So when the truck to pick up the stock came in, we had to form these human chains. Bear in mind, this is a warehouse in the hot Australian summer with no air conditioning. And we had to then we're all like a bunch of high school kids. We had to form these human chains. But because you couldn't stand around the edge of the thing, you had to stand on top of the cartons, where the cartons of cordial, dozen cordial per carton or something, and they were plastic, so they broke pretty easily. So the damages and the write-offs were just off the charts, because everyone had to stand on top of it because there's no room to go anywhere else, and then hand form a human chain to get the stuff to the front. And the other sort of inefficiencies that were there, but because the guy, the manager there couldn't organise shit to save himself, a lot of the kids sharing the view that I had, this was a ridiculous and absurd inefficiency and unnecessary waste of human labour. None of us were particularly motivated. We did what we were told, and we were, the sort of classic kids of the era, and so we thought we wanted to do a good job. We were all kids that envisioned a day in the future that we'd find the cure for cancer and so on. So reasonably well motivated. It was quite a middle class area, so there weren't really that many ferals in a place like that, but it was horrendously inefficient, and I speculated on that how could a business this inefficient sort of prosper or do any good. Now they had a pretty much an exclusive deal with all the major grocery chains, and that kind of offset the inefficiency and they may have gathered or gained some efficiencies from the way they were doing their distribution into regional depots and then redistributing out of those. But it was now I've been in various places where working as where inefficiency was just how things were, incredible wastage going on at all levels. But the common factor seemed to be poorly trained, over promoted people that had no skin in the game, that didn't care. They weren't fussed. They were, really at the bottom end of the whole sort of career work food chain thing, and they didn't give a fuck effectively, or didn't give a fuck about the things that mattered. That managing that warehouse thing, he liked having the young kids running around, and there was this little intercom system that used to get on, I want everybody to go and do this, and everybody would start going over there. And he used to stand up on this mezzanine level, grinning broadly as he sort of got off on the idea of, look at the power I have here. But he's someone who sort of person that shouldn't have had power because he didn't really know what to do with it. Got drunk on it. But then compare that to a company of electrical engineers that I went to work for, where everyone's well educated, they're well trained, very committed, they understand the bigger picture, and they know what they're doing. And it's quite a small number of people here, but the amount of work that we got through, because everyone knows what they're doing, everyone can work around what the next person's doing. They can say, okay, that person's doing part A of the process, I'll jump in on part B, but I won't do it quite yet because that person isn't finished. So everybody was bright, high IQ, well educated, focused, a lot of them skin in the game. They were all getting like bonuses for higher achievement and a whole range of things. And the difference was fucking phenomenal. The wastage was almost non-existent, and the commitment to getting the job done was very high. Also, the ability to adapt. If there was a slight sort of slowdown or chink in the process, or the process sort of fell over momentarily for whatever the reason, everyone else would look at that and then would quickly adapt their tasks and their delivery and timing of the tasks around that change. So high level of adaptability, which in itself requires a higher level of intellect. So fewer people can often do a better job and can do a lot more work. If that warehouse, which doesn't even exist anymore, that warehouse with the cordials I was talking about, if that was run efficiently, it would have been done very differently. And twice as much work could have been done with half as many staff. But as it was an object lesson in inefficiency and mismanagement, in my view. And I went on as a schoolboy, in the summer holidays jobs. I went on to observe, quite a few of those sort of things where I was shaking my head in disbelief. You had to be careful, though. If you opened your mouth and suggested a better way of doing things, you could very quickly find yourself out of a job. So anyway, so looking at any level, like you think back to your time at school, and especially if people say over the age of 50, you think back to your time of school and how many bright kids were there really? How many kids who knew what they were doing? How many kids that could? And I remember there were kids at school who were bright kids. I don't know, in science class or something, there would be the kid that would be watching and observing. Well, if we do this and then that, then we can do this physics experiment in this way. And they say, wow, that's what he's smart to think of that. And maybe the guy read it somewhere, or maybe he heard it from his dad or something. I mean, who knows? But there were people that just could observe and make the assessment and then act in a manner that was just more efficient than the next guy. But there weren't that many bright kids at school. I mean, what would you say? Is there sort of 10%? Now, if you look at the IQ, the supposed IQ levels when higher achievement kicks in, it's supposed to be you have to have an IQ of 120 or above for higher achievement levels to kick in. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't be the plumber that looks at the pipe and go, oh, you know what, I think we can do this with it. So there's a practicality aspect to people which isn't necessarily reflected in IQ. Some people just have that very practical sort of looking at things, and that is something that I don't think is necessarily, maybe even not IQ related. But anyway, this is the amount of IQ, or that supposedly it's 120 IQ gives you, it means you're brighter than, was it 90, going off the top of my head here, 92% of the population, I think it is. By the time you get to an IQ of 130, where a lot of the real high achievement, the finding the cure for cancer comes in, that tends to be, then you're brighter than 98% of the population. By the time you're 140 IQ, you're brighter than 99.6% of the population, and so on. So if you look at this more broadly, the fewer people you have, but thus a higher proportion of brighter people, then the more efficient and effective and wealthier your society is going to be, on balance. Now, the West has been loading itself up with low IQ third world peasants for like 25, 30 years now. So the proportion of low IQ people is increasing out of all, almost exponentially. And as the white people are dying off and are not being encouraged to procreate or have children or that sort of thing, then the relative number of higher IQ people is declining. The West is not importing high IQ people. The West is importing low IQ people. Many of the countries in Africa and around Asia and Bangladesh, the average IQ is like 70, for fuck's sake. So, and these people are coming in by the gazillion. Whereas the higher IQ people, again, aren't being brought in and are not procreating to the same extent. Now, if you look at, say, the population of, say Britain or the West generally, and incorporating quite a decent part of the baby boom, the population between 1950 and 1970, and going off a lower base, of course, was 15% or something population increase. And that's after a lot of deaths during the war, which have cleared out a lot of the older people through that process and the depression. And so and a lot of new babies being born in to an overall younger population anyway. A lot of babies being born in the baby boom, but still the population didn't increase to anywhere near the extent that it did in the mass migration years, where the population has increased. So overall, if you look at that post-war, say up to 1970 or so, across the Western world, taking out mass migration, the population on balance increased by, say, 2 to 3%. Now, since, say, the late 1990s, the populations have increased by between 20 and 30% in Western countries. In Australia, it's 25% has increased in 25 years. And for fuck's sake. And the majority of these people are not the rocket scientists that the globalist propagandists tell us, but in fact, IQ 70 type people, whether they come from Somalia or Bangladesh or Pakistan or rural India, it doesn't matter. So a very small proportion of people coming in that you'd rate in even the 100 plus IQ, let alone in the 120s or 130s. So this makes society as in totality much less efficient, and means resources are being spread around that is causing everyone's standard of living to decline. But if you have a smaller population of better trained, better educated, and so on people, then the national wealth available, people are producing more, creating more, inventing more, innovating more, being organisationally more efficient, which means everybody then has a higher standard of living because more goods and services of value are being produced rather than services being consumed without a corresponding delivery of value. The IQ 70 peasant from Bangladesh or Somalia isn't producing anything of value. And now with the advent of AI and so on, to what extent will this sort of relationship get shaken up in terms of creating social value and delivering social value? Now, social value, for example, if somebody finds the cure for cancer and they get very rich out of it, I'm okay with that. Doesn't matter if they get rich; they still created something of great social value. Or the guy that starts up the company or invents a new product or or starts up a company that efficiently delivers services. It doesn't matter. I mean, it could be delivering, I don't know, ice cream or something. Then it doesn't matter if it's efficiently delivered and is giving value. Then that is social value. And if that guy gets rich in the process or employs thousands of people, that's good too. So how social value is delivered is by efficiency, effectiveness, organizational effectiveness, invention, innovation. All of these things deliver social value. They may deliver riches to the person that comes up with the design or something, and that's fine too, but it's still social value. Whereas bringing in gazillions of IQ 70 peasants into the first world doesn't deliver social value. It consumes social value, thus declines the overall value that all of us would otherwise share. So I see depopulation as a good thing, because for every bright person that comes along, there's going to be 10 or 15 people who are much less than bright, or 1 in every 2 are going to be much less than bright. But once you start bringing gazillions of IQ 70 peasants, then the ratio of bright to completely moronic, that relationship deteriorates further, which then, of course, makes us, I believe, and I will assert, poorer. So on that basis, I would suggest depopulation, in the West at least, is a good thing. Now, if you look at world population, the explosion of populations around the world is all in low IQ peasant societies, whether they be in Africa or, again, Pakistan, Bangladesh, fucking Afghanistan or something like that. So the population explode where they're having 5, 6, 7 children per woman. A lot of those are brothers and sisters and cousins procreating, but nonetheless, now this creates a huge surplus of low IQ peasants who all want to come to the rich West and are encouraged to do so by the globalist sort of hustle machine. But that's to the detriment of everyone in the West. Everyone in the West will lose or will suffer a declining standard of living because of that. But these people can't add value. They're just too stupid to do it. And so they should be kept where they are, and population control measures, put in place there. So this is where the populations are exploding. But in the West, where the cost of living is going through the roof and so on, white people, white middle class people are choosing not to have children. It's too expensive. It's too difficult. It's too hard. Families are being frowned upon. White men are being treated as Nazis, and so what's the incentive for white people to have children in the West? There's a diminishing incentive which needs to be addressed. But overall, this means that in world population total, the amount of non-productive low IQ people are outbreeding by the factor of several to 1 the productive people, and that's not a good thing for anybody. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.